A young billionaire opens the gates of his Malibu estate on a stormy night, only to find a small shivering girl staring up at him with eyes too wise for her age, and then she speaks the words that pierce through his carefully built world. "Sorry, Dad. I'm late." In that instant, everything Aiden Cross believed about his life fractures. Could she really be his daughter? Or is this the beginning of a deception powerful enough to unravel the empire he spent decades building? Stay with me, because what happens after this shocking moment will test loyalty, memory, and the meaning of family itself. Would you believe her if you were in his shoes? The rain came down hard that night, rattling the glass walls of the Cross mansion, as though nature itself wanted to break inside. Aiden, 39 years old, and head of one of America's most powerful tech firms, was buried in spreadsheets and financial forecasts. To him, the storm was just background noise, a soundtrack to his solitude. His staff had long gone. The only lights glowed in his office, where billions of dollars in decisions were reduced to columns of numbers. Then came the knock. Soft at first, nearly lost beneath the thunder, but unmistakable. His eyes narrowed. It was nearly 10 o'clock. His property was locked down with security systems, gates, cameras. Nobody should be able to reach his front door. Another knock followed, this time sharper, urgent. With a sigh of irritation, he rose from his chair and strode across the marble floors, muttering to himself that someone would pay for letting a stranger get this far. When Aiden pulled open the heavy oak door, the irritation froze in his throat. Standing on the doorstep, drenched by rain, was a little girl no older than 6. Her hair clung to her cheeks, her tiny fingers clutched a soaked backpack, and her lips trembled. But her eyes, dark and steady, met his with unnerving certainty. Before he could even ask what she was doing there, she whispered, "You're Aiden Cross. You're my dad." For a man whose world thrived on logic and control, it felt like being punched in the chest. He wanted to slam the door, call security, do anything but stand paralyzed in the storm's fury. He forced his voice to remain cool. "You must be mistaken." Yet he didn't close the door. He couldn't. Something about the child's fragility, her soaked clothes, her brave little chin, held him in place. "My mom told me to come here," she said, voice shaking but determined. "She said if she couldn't take care of me, you would." Aiden's mind raced. Was this some scam, set up to extort him? But when he demanded her mother's name, the girl whispered it without hesitation. Lila Donovan. The name carried no recognition yet. It struck a nerve deep inside him, like a faint echo of a song he should remember but couldn't. He pressed further, demanding to know how she arrived, where her mother was, why she was alone in the storm. Her answers only made the night more surreal. She had taken a taxi with money her mother gave her for emergencies. She had memorized Aiden's address because Mom said I might need it someday, and she hadn't seen her mother since they became separated hours earlier. Aiden knew the rational choice call: the police let them handle the missing person case. That's what any cautious man would do. But as thunder shook the mansion again and the girl shivered on his doorstep, he realized he couldn't push her away. Whatever trap this might be, no child deserved to face the storm alone. "Come inside," he said, finally, his voice low but firm. The little girl stepped over the threshold, dripping water onto the gleaming marble. She looked impossibly small under the glow of the chandelier, clutching that ragged backpack like it contained her whole world. Aiden tried to keep his distance, telling himself he was only offering temporary shelter. He asked her simple questions, but the girl, Emily, she introduced herself, spoke with the kind of steady innocence that eroded every wall he tried to put up. She seemed less afraid of him than he was of her. When she sneezed, he found himself walking her upstairs to a guest room, pulling out one of his plain shirts for her to wear as a nightgown, and showing her the bathroom. "Take a hot bath, I'll bring you something to eat," he instructed. Her soft "thank you" nearly undid him. Downstairs in the kitchen, as he made soup with hands more used to signing billion-dollar contracts, he kept hearing her words echoing, "You're my dad." He told himself he'd call the authorities in the morning, that this was temporary. But deep inside, something stirred a restlessness he hadn't felt in years. By the time Emily padded into the kitchen in his oversized shirt hair damp and eyes clearer, the walls he had spent decades building were already starting to crumble. She ate as if she hadn't had a real meal in days. Between spoonfuls, she repeated what her mother had told her, that Aiden wouldn't remember, that he might not believe, but that deep down you're a good man. For the first time in years, Aiden wasn't sure if the empire he built mattered at all. Because if her words were true, if she really was his daughter, then the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm about to tear through his life. And as Emily drifted to sleep upstairs that night, Aiden Cross sat alone in his office, staring at his reflection in the darkened window. The question was no longer whether he believed the girl. The question was whether he was ready to face the past she carried with her, and the truth that could change everything. The morning after Emily arrived, Aiden Cross felt like a stranger in his own home. For years, the Malibu mansion had been nothing but a fortress of glass and stone, a place where silence reigned and nothing existed outside of work. But now, as he walked past the guest room and heard the quiet sound of a child humming to herself, something in the air had changed. He wasn't sure if it was comfort or danger, but it unsettled him all the same. Emily sat at the breakfast counter later that morning, her small hands wrapped around a mug of hot cocoa the housekeeper had prepared. She kicked her feet against the stool, calm as if she belonged there. For Aiden, it was surreal. She wasn't asking for toys or making demands. She simply ate toast and studied him with those steady brown eyes, eyes that seemed to pierce deeper than any investor or competitor ever had. "I need to know more," he finally said, his voice sharper than he intended. "About your mother. About you." Emily set her toast down, wiping crumbs from her lips. She spoke with disarming clarity for someone her age. "Mom said you'd want proof, that you'd want to know if it's true. That's why she told me. If something happened, I had to find you." The rational part of Aiden told him this was still a scam, a trick designed to exploit him. But Emily's every word cut against that theory. Her details weren't vague. They were precise, intimate, in a way that clawed at memories he couldn't quite reach. He decided not to wait. That afternoon, he called Diane Ward, his longtime attorney. She was efficient, unflappable, and exactly the person he trusted when emotion threatened to cloud judgment. When she arrived at the mansion, Emily watched her with curious interest, as though she knew the stakes of this meeting. Aiden wasted no time. "I want a DNA test, today, quietly." Diane adjusted her glasses, her expression unreadable. "I'll make the arrangements. But you understand, Aiden, if the results are positive, everything changes." He only nodded. Change was already inevitable. 2 hours later, a nurse from a private lab arrived. Emily sat still as the swab brushed the inside of her cheek, showing no fear, almost as if she had expected this moment. Aiden tried to mask his tension, but the weight in his chest was undeniable. 48 hours, the nurse promised. 48 hours until science answered the question that had already begun to consume him. Those hours crawled. Aiden buried himself in meetings and contracts, but his mind never strayed far from the girl upstairs. He found himself watching her when he should have been working, the way she carefully colored in a notebook the housekeeper had given her, the way she padded barefoot through the long hallways as if exploring a castle. Each time he looked at her, something in her manner, the tilt of her head, the way her lips pressed together when she was thinking, stirred a déjà vu he couldn't explain. By the second day, Aiden could no longer hide behind his work. He found Emily in the kitchen, perched on a stool beside the housekeeper, attempting to flip pancakes. "Want some?" she asked innocently, as though feeding him breakfast was the most natural thing in the world. He declined at first, then surprised himself by taking a bite. She watched him expectantly. "Mom says you like coffee. Black. No sugar." He froze. That was true. It wasn't something many people knew. He hadn't shared that detail with anyone outside his inner circle. "How do you know that?" he asked carefully. Emily only shrugged. "Mom told me. She said you drank it every morning." The words settled like a stone in his chest. It was too specific to dismiss. Later that afternoon, his phone rang. The lab had expedited the results. The voice on the other end was clinical detached. "Mr. Cross, the probability of paternity is greater than 99.9%. The child is biologically yours." For a man used to negotiating billion-dollar contracts without flinching, Aiden found himself unable to respond. He hung up and sat in silence, staring at the wall as if it had answers. His daughter, a fact not speculation, his daughter had been alive for 6 years and he had known nothing. When he entered the living room, Emily was curled up on the couch watching cartoons. She sensed him, immediately turning to him with wide eyes. "They called, didn't they?" she asked softly. Aiden nodded, unable to mask his shock. Emily smiled, but not in triumph, rather with relief. "I knew it," she said simply. His chest tightened. "How could you know if I didn't even know?" The question came out harsher than he intended. Emily's response was calm, almost rehearsed. "Mom said you wouldn't remember, that it was complicated. But she said one day you would." The word remember echoed in his mind. Memory, complications. His thoughts turned unbidden to the accident 6 years earlier, the one he had long buried as nothing more than an unfortunate chapter. He remembered the crash vaguely, the hospital stay, but nothing around it. Could it be connected? As Emily drifted off to sleep later that night, Aiden sat alone in his office, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. His daughter was real. His past was not what he believed it to be. And somewhere out there, a woman named Lila Donovan held the key to the answers he desperately needed. The storm that had begun at his gates had not passed. It had only just broken the surface. Underneath lay secrets he had never imagined, secrets that would demand more from him than money, power, or intellect. For the first time in his life, Aiden Cross understood that control was an illusion, and nothing, not even the empire he built, could shield him from the truth waiting to be uncovered. The news of the DNA test should have given Aiden peace. Instead, it opened a deeper wound. Emily was his daughter, no question. But the woman who raised her, the woman who carried his child for 6 years without him knowing, remained a mystery he couldn't shake. Lila Donovan. Her name gnawed at him like a song he couldn't remember the lyrics to. Every time Emily spoke about her mother, what she liked, what she said, how she smiled, Aiden felt a strange pull in his chest, a sense that something important had been stolen from him. And he knew where he had to begin. Chicago. It wasn't a city Aiden loved, but it was where the pieces led him. Lila had lived there under another name, moving from apartment to apartment, staying one step ahead of something or someone. Diane Ward, his attorney, had traced her trail through utility bills, job records, and fragments of identification, each one dropped like breadcrumbs across the country. And one particular location kept coming up: the Adler Planetarium. She was there often, Diane explained. Neighbors saw her taking Emily to shows, sitting under the dome for hours. It's not just a tourist stop for her. It meant something. Aiden didn't hesitate. The next evening, he was boarding his jet with Emily at his side. He told himself it was to protect her, that she might remember details he couldn't, but deep down he knew the truth. He couldn't leave her behind anymore. She wasn't just evidence of a past life. She was the key to unlocking it. When they arrived at the planetarium, Emily's face lit up at the sight of the great glass dome rising over Lake Michigan. Mom loved it here, she whispered, tugging at his hand. She said the stars always told the truth even when people didn't. Inside the hall was quiet, only a few scattered visitors moving among the exhibits. The lights dimmed as a new show began, constellations flickering across the curved ceiling. Emily leaned back in her seat, eyes wide. Aiden watched her for a moment before turning his gaze upward. The stars glowed with cold brilliance, and for the first time in years he felt small and power, but in perspective. Then, unexpectedly, a memory cracked open. The smell of coffee, laughter in a low voice. A woman sitting beside him pointing at the constellations. That one, she had set her finger tracing the arc of Orion's belt. That's the hunter. Strong, but lonely. You remind me of him. He had laughed at the comparison, dismissing it, but her words had lingered. He turned to look at her, but in the memory her face blurred like smoke, disappearing before he could hold it. The vision left him shaken. Emily noticed. "You saw something, didn't you?" she asked. He nodded, unsure how much to tell her. "I think I was here once, with your mom." The girl's expression softened with a kind of knowing far beyond her years. She said, "You might remember when you looked at the stars again." Later, as they left the planetarium, Emily clutched his hand tightly. "She told me once that love was like the sky," she said. "Sometimes you can't see the stars, but they're always there." Aiden swallowed hard, realizing Lila had been preparing Emily for this very moment, for a father who might not recall her, but would search the heavens for answers. Back at the hotel, Aiden sat alone with Diane's growing file of Lila's life. It painted a picture of a woman who lived with constant fear, always moving, always changing names, never staying long enough to leave roots. Yet beneath the fear there was also consistency. Wherever she went, she found libraries, museums, planetariums, places where Emily could learn, dream, and grow. She had protected their daughter fiercely, even while she was hunted by shadows Aiden still couldn't name. But the more he read, the clearer it became. Lila had loved him once. Not the billionaire, not the empire, but the man. And something his family, his accident, or both had torn them apart. That night he dreamed again. He was in a hospital bed, tubes and wires binding him. A woman's hand held his warm and trembling. He could hear her voice pleading, desperate. He needs to know. He deserves to know. Then another voice, colder, heavier, his father's. "You're not welcome here. He doesn't need you clouding his future. Leave and don't return." Aiden woke in a sweat, his chest tight with rage and grief. For the first time, the memories were clear enough to connect. His family had intervened, cut Lila out of his life while his mind was fragile, rewritten his story without his consent. They had stolen not only his memories but 6 years of his daughter's life. The next morning, Emily found him staring out at Lake Michigan, eyes haunted. She climbed onto the chair beside him, pressing her small hand into his. "You look sad," she said softly. "Mom said, when you feel lost, you just need to follow the brightest star." He looked at her, then really looked at her, the resemblance to Lila, the quiet strength in her tiny frame, the hope in her eyes. She wasn't just the reminder of what he had lost. She was proof of what he still had. For Aiden, the stars no longer represented distant mysteries. They were markers of truth, fragments of a past he was piecing together, and promises of a future he could still shape. But as he held Emily's hand, he also understood something else. The truth written in the stars wasn't just about Lila. It was about the fight ahead. A fight not just for memories, but for the family he was determined to protect this time at any cost. The day Aiden Cross chose to face his family began with silence, the kind that pressed against the walls of his Malibu estate and made every breath feel heavier. He had spent nights unraveling fragments of memory, nights staring at photographs of Lila Donovan, nights piecing together how his life had been stolen from him. Now the clarity was too sharp to ignore. He remembered enough: her voice, her touch, the plans they had made before it was all torn away. He remembered his father's hand shaping his future like a sculptor chipping away stone. Only this time the stone was his life, his choices, his love. When the black cars arrived, lined like an invading force at the foot of his driveway, Aiden was ready. Gerald Cross, patriarch and puppeteer, stepped out first, every inch of him polished power. His mother Eleanor followed quietly, her eyes downcast, as though even she had grown weary of playing her role. Richard, the older brother, appeared smug and certain, with his wife at his side. Caroline, his sister, walked behind them, her unease visible even from a distance. They entered the mansion as if it still belonged to them, as though Aiden were still the boy who bowed to their every command. In the great room, Aiden stood waiting. He didn't sit, didn't offer drinks, didn't pretend this was anything but war. "You came quickly," he said flatly. "I suppose Diane told you more than I intended her to." Gerald wasted no time. "We heard about the girl," he said, his tone clipped dismissive. "And about this nonsense with Lila Donovan. We need to resolve this before it spirals out of control." Aiden's jaw tightened. "Her name is Emily, and she isn't nonsense. She's my daughter." Richard scoffed. "DNA tests can be faked. You know how many men in your position have been duped by women with agendas?" Aiden's eyes flared. "This isn't about money. Lila never asked for a dime. She asked for protection for her child. My child." Vanessa Richards' wife leaned forward. "That's exactly what someone running a scam would do. First comes the child, then the sob story, and before you know it, they're demanding millions." The sound of small footsteps interrupted them. Emily had wandered into the room, drawn by the unfamiliar voices. She froze under their stares, shrinking slightly, but still clutching her worn teddy bear. "Dad," she asked softly, as if checking if he was still the man she trusted. "Come here," Aiden said, extending his hand. She ran to him, and he placed a protective arm around her shoulders. "This is Emily," he announced. "My daughter, your granddaughter, your niece, your family." The room went still. Gerald's eyes swept over the girl with a calculating gaze, searching for weakness, searching for denial. Finally, he muttered, "She has the Cross look about her." Eleanor added quietly, "The eyes. They're yours, Aiden." But the moment of recognition passed quickly. Gerald's voice turned cold again. "Even if she is blood, that doesn't mean we let her or her mother compromise everything we've built." That was it, the phrase that lit fire in Aiden's chest. "Everything we've built. You mean everything you've built at the cost of my life. You erased her from me. I remember now, the accident, the hospital. She came to see me and you had her thrown out. You lied to me, told me it was better not to remember. You decided for me that I didn't need her, or my child." Eleanor's hand fluttered at her side, as if she wanted to reach for him but couldn't. Caroline's face flushed with shock. Richard shook his head, smirking, as though his younger brother were delusional. But Gerald didn't flinch. "We did what was necessary. She was a distraction, a waitress, for God's sake. No background, no value, no future. You were poised to lead an empire, and she would have dragged you into mediocrity. We couldn't allow it." "Oh," Aiden stepped forward, his voice rising with a power he hadn't used against his father before. You couldn't allow it, so you destroyed it. You stole 6 years from me, 6 years from her, 6 years from Emily. And you dare call it necessary. Gerald's expression hardened. This family doesn't survive on sentiment, Aiden. It survives on control, discipline, sacrifice. If you walk away now, you're throwing everything away for what? For some misplaced sense of love you barely remember. At that, Emily's small voice broke through the heavy air. He remembers enough, she said, her eyes steady on Gerald. And Mom said, love isn't misplaced. It's the only thing that keeps us safe. The silence that followed was crushing. Gerald stared at her as though she were an insect that had spoken. Aiden bent down his hand, tightening around hers. She's right. I've lived my whole life under your definition of power, but now I see it clearly. Power isn't control. It's not manipulation. It's the courage to protect the people who matter no matter the cost. Richard laughed bitterly. And what will you do, Aiden? Throw away your inheritance. Walk out on the company. You can't survive without what we built. Aiden straightened his voice steady. Watch me. If any of you interfere with Emily or with Lila, I'll cut ties completely. My shares, my title, my name, you can keep them. But this child stays with me. And if you try to take her, I swear you'll regret it. Gerald's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing into something close to hatred. You're not thinking clearly. For the first time in my life, Aiden said, I am. The family filed out soon after, their polished shoes clicking against the marble like retreating soldiers. Caroline lingered at the door, her eyes wet. I'm sorry, Aiden, she whispered. I should have done more. I should have stopped them. He nodded, but his focus was already on Emily, whose small hand remained wrapped firmly in his. When the cars finally disappeared down the drive, Aiden exhaled for the first time in hours. He looked at Emily, who studied his face with quiet determination. They don't like me, she said softly. They don't like what they can't control, Aiden replied. But that doesn't matter. I like you, and that's never going to change. In that moment, surrounded by silence and the fading echoes of his family's power, Aiden understood something profound. He had confronted the past not just to expose their lies, but to claim his own life. He wasn't just the son of Gerald Cross anymore. He wasn't just the heir to an empire. He was Emily's father. And no empire, no legacy, no lie would ever take that away from him again. The move to Lake Tahoe wasn't just a change of address. For Aiden Cross, it was a declaration. After months of unraveling lies, confronting his family, and piecing together memories of the woman he had once loved, he was finally ready to begin something new. The mountains rose around the lake like silent guardians, their snow-capped peaks catching the first light of dawn. For the first time in years, Aiden felt like the world was big enough for him to breathe. The house he chose wasn't a mansion carved from glass and marble like Malibu. It was built of cedar and stone with wide porches and windows that framed the lake like a painting. It wasn't meant to impress investors or intimidate rivals. It was meant to hold laughter arguments, bedtime stories, and the sound of a child running through its halls. It was meant to be a home. Emily had claimed it as her own almost immediately. She darted from room to room on the first day, announcing where she would put her books, where her stuffed animals would live, and which corner of the garden would become her secret explorer's spot. Her joy was unrestrained, a kind of freedom Aiden hadn't seen in her before. Watching her, he realized she wasn't just settling in. She was beginning to heal. But the true test of this new beginning came when Lila Donovan stepped onto the porch for the first time. She looked smaller than he remembered in fragments of memory, thinner from years of running. Her eyes carried shadows of exhaustion, But when Emily threw herself into her arms, those shadows lifted, replaced by a light Aiden hadn't seen since his memories began to return. Lila held her daughter as though letting go might shatter her. When she finally raised her gaze to Aiden, the silence between them spoke louder than any greeting. They had lost years. That truth couldn't be erased. But in the stillness of Lake Tahoe, with the scent of pine in the air, and Emily's laughter ringing out like a bell, Aiden knew they had a chance to build again. That first evening, the three of them sat by the fireplace. Emily insisted on roasting marshmallows, her cheeks glowing with firelight. Lila smiled faintly, watching Aiden help their daughter balance a skewer over the flames. "You've changed," she said quietly, almost as if to herself. "So have you," Aiden replied. "We both had to." Lila shook her head, her eyes flickering with both hurt and resilience. "I didn't choose this. Your family chose it for me, for us. I tried to fight Aiden, but I was one woman with a baby against a wall of power I couldn't break." He reached for her hand, hesitating before their fingers touched. "I remember enough now to know we had something worth fighting for. And I remember the night I gave you a ring. I want to believe we can find that again." Her eyes filled, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand and let his fingers close around hers. "We're not the same people anymore," she whispered. "Maybe that's a good thing," he said. "Maybe we're stronger now." The weeks that followed weren't perfect. Aiden had to learn what it meant to be a father, not just a provider. He learned that bedtime wasn't complete without 2 stories and a nightlight. He learned that Emily hated broccoli but loved helping cook pasta. He learned that children asked questions that had no easy answers, like when Emily asked why her grandparents didn't like her. Each time he found himself navigating uncharted ground, often clumsy, sometimes frustrated, but always determined. Lila, too, had to adjust. For years she had lived with the instinct to run, to never unpack fully, to never trust stability. Here, surrounded by water and mountains, she had to remind herself that it was safe to exhale. Some nights she would stand on the porch long after Emily was asleep, staring out at the moonlit lake. Aiden would join her, and though they didn't always speak, the silence felt like progress. One evening, Emily brought out a drawing she had made. 3 stick figures stood beneath a bright yellow sun: a tall man, a woman with long brown hair, and a small girl holding their hands. Above them, she had scrawled a single word in uneven letters: family. She held it up proudly. "This is us," she declared. For Aiden, it was both a gift and a challenge. A picture wasn't enough to erase years of pain or the scars of betrayal. But it was enough to remind him what he was fighting for. And it was enough to remind Lila that despite everything, Emily had always believed they were meant to be whole. As winter settled in the lake, froze along its edges, and the pine trees bowed under snow, the house filled with the rhythms of a family finding its way. There were arguments about chores, laughter that spilled too loud, and quiet nights when Aiden and Lila shared coffee at the kitchen table, slowly rediscovering each other. On New Year's Eve, Aiden did something he hadn't planned. While Emily slept upstairs, he led Lila outside to the porch where the stars stretched endlessly overhead. He pulled a small box from his pocket, the same ring he had given her years before. "I kept it," she said in surprise, her voice breaking. "I want to try again," he told her. "Not the way we were before, but the way we are now. No more secrets, no more stolen years, just us and her." Tears spilled down Lila's cheeks as she nodded, slipping the ring back onto her finger. For the first time in a long time, hope outweighed fear. Emily woke to fireworks exploding over the lake, their reflections shimmering across the water. She ran to the porch, wrapping her arms around her parents. Together, the 3 of them stood beneath the night sky, the past behind them, and the future unwritten. For Aiden Cross, the empire he had built no longer mattered. What mattered was here, in the laughter of his daughter, in the strength of the woman who had never stopped loving him, and in the promise of a life where power meant something new. A new dawn had risen at Lake Tahoe, and for the first time it was theirs. The story of Aiden Cross began with a storm and a knock at the door, but it unfolded into something far greater, a journey of rediscovery, redemption, and the power of love to reshape even the hardest of lives. Aiden was a man who believed control defined him, that success was measured by the empire he commanded and the wealth he accumulated. But one rainy night, a little girl named Emily arrived at his mansion and shattered that illusion. Her words, "Sorry, Dad. I'm late," were not only shocking but transformative. They forced him to confront truths buried beneath years of lies and silence. Through Emily, Aiden learned that he had a past. He didn't remember a love with Lila Donovan, a life stolen from him after an accident, and a family who chose power over honesty. The DNA test confirmed what his heart began to accept: Emily was his daughter. But more than blood, she became his mirror, showing him the emptiness of a life built only on ambition. As he followed Lila's trail from Chicago to the quiet corners of her hidden life, he unearthed not just lost memories, but the resilience of a woman who had raised their child with strength and hope, while running from forces too powerful to resist. The confrontation with his family was the crucible that defined him. No longer the obedient son molded by Gerald Cross, Aiden stood as his own man. He rejected the empire that demanded his compliance and embraced the role that demanded his heart, a father willing to fight for his daughter and a man willing to fight for the woman he once promised forever. That defiance was more than rebellion, it was liberation. For the first time, Aiden lived by his own definition of power, the courage to protect what mattered most, even at great cost. At Lake Tahoe, surrounded by mountains and water that reflected both stillness and strength, Aiden, Lila, and Emily began again. Their life was not perfect. He stumbled through fatherhood. Lila wrestled with old fears, and Emily asked questions that broke their hearts. But it was real. It was built not on illusions of control, but on trust, honesty, and a willingness to face each day together. The ring that Aiden returned to Lila was more than a promise of love. It was a symbol of resilience, of second chances, of choosing family over everything else. From Aiden's journey, there is a lesson for all of us. We live in a world that often pushes us to chase titles, wealth, and appearances, convincing us that success means climbing higher and faster than anyone else. But true success cannot be measured in numbers or possessions. It is found in the relationships we build, the truths we face, and the courage we show when life forces us to choose. Aiden's story reminds us that sometimes the bravest act is not conquering the world, but opening the door to it, welcoming the people who matter even when it terrifies us. For the audience, this story is a call to reflection. Ask yourself, what are you holding on to that no longer defines you? What lies or fears have shaped your choices? And what would it take to step into a new dawn, one defined not by control, but by connection? Perhaps, like Aiden, you'll find that the storms in life are not here to break us, but to clear the path for something truer, something worth fighting for. If this story moved you, if it made you pause and think about what truly matters, I invite you to join us on this journey. Subscribe to this channel, leave a comment about the lesson you took from Aiden's life, and share it with someone who needs hope. Your support is what drives us to keep creating meaningful stories that inspire, heal, and remind us all that even in the darkest nights, a new dawn is always waiting.